Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today on this very alarming topic that's increasing throughout our industry, vacant land scams. I'm very pleased to introduce Melanie Kido. She is Vice President and Massachusetts State Counsel for CADIC. Melanie has worked in the title insurance industry for over 20 years. We also have Joseph Taborsak, Vice President and Senior Claims Counsel for CADIC. Joe has been a claims counsel in CADIC's Rocky Hill office for over 5 years. They will answer any questions at the end if you want to put them in the chat. If they don't get to all the questions, we'll be able to see them and they will handle all questions after the webinar. So I'm going to now let them teach you the best practices for protecting clients and yourselves from vacant land scams.
Thank you, Nicole. I appreciate it. And thank you, Coast to Coast, for having us here today. We very much appreciate our partnership with Coast to Coast and Lear. Today, Joe and I are going to be talking about, as Nicole mentioned, how to recognize and prevent seller impersonation fraud. As Nicole said, a hot topic in our industry, unfortunately. So why, first of all, let's talk about why is there an increase in real estate fraud? The main reason is the use of effective communication technology creates the opportunity for anonymity, the rise in number of people working remotely, the increase of online availability of public information, and the greater sophistication of these criminals, causing the opportunity for this type of fraud. Why did this fraud succeed? Basically, people presume legitimacy, so they let their guard down. People can't resist what looks like a good deal. And so the bad actors take advantage of these situations. How can this type of real estate fraud be prevented? You need to be hyper vigilant. You need to be aware of the risk. You need to use best practices and the available resources to verify and know the warning signs. And we're going to talk about those warning signs and what you can do to avoid the risk here in this presentation. So what we're talking about are unoccupied property. As Nicole said, you know, the topic is vacant land, but we're not just talking about vacant land, we're talking about vacant land, unoccupied homes, investment property where people are not necessarily there all the time, REO property where the owner is absent. And Joe is going to be giving you some examples from our claims department of situations where the owner is just not there all the time, and red flags and warning signs to be aware of. Speaking of red flags, what type of red flags should you be on the lookout for? Listing price is below fair market value. Like I said, people cannot resist a good deal. Seller wants cash. Cash is king. Who doesn't want cash? Seller insists on the closing right away. There's no listing broker involved. There's no seller's attorney involved. The seller claims to be out of state or in another country. These are all red flags to be aware of. And we see them time and time again on these frauds. Additional warning signs. Seller communicates via text or email only. Seller refuses to meet in person. Seller insists on a remote closing or a mail away closing. They don't want to be at the closing in person. The information provided by the seller does not match the information about the real owner. And we're going to talk about some things that you can do to verify that information. The seller does not have an actual key to the property. Sounds ridiculous, but you'd be surprised. And Joe's going to give you an example of that as well. Initial contact from the seller, not a prior client, obviously someone you're not familiar with, wanting to sell the property. If it's by text or email, review that text or email for red flags. Is it formal? Is it something that is it something that doesn't sound like you would see in a normal context? Is it Read it for typos? Um, look if it doesn't sound right, if it doesn't feel right, if it doesn't, what I call the smell test. Um, go with your instincts. Obtain the party's name, address, contact information if it's different from the property. Conduct a reverse search on the email and the phone number. Do your due diligence. And if that reverse search results in a match information provided, conduct further due diligence. Don't stop there. You want to do more due diligence. You want to go on with further steps. Next steps. You want to obtain copies of the assessor's records, the current tax bill, the recent transactions. I had somebody contact me recently and say, we have a seller, their name on the purchase and sale, their address on the purchase and sale agreement doesn't match the address for the property. It didn't match the property address on the tax records. All of the addresses were, there was they were selling property in Western Mass. Their property on the purchase and sale agreement was in Boston. The tax records was a property on the Cape. I was like, what is going on here? Something is not matching up here. Their attorney had this website that didn't, the attorney's website didn't even have an it looked like phony website. It didn't have a phone number for the attorney, didn't have a email address for the attorney. Something just didn't, it wasn't passing the smell test for me. It certainly wasn't passing the smell test for the agent. You want to request a Zoom call or similar video meeting with the person. You want to obtain the seller's government issue ID with a photo and the signature. You want to request that the deed be notarized in person by somebody that you know. Ask for one of the attorneys at Coast to Coast. There's plenty of ways for you to make sure that you identify the actual identity of the owner of the property. You want to compare the signature on that ID with the signature on recorded documents, because obviously you can't compare it with the signature on the purchase and sale agreement because everything's DocuSign these days. But you can compare that signature with the signature on recorded documents, homesteads, mortgages. You can compare the address on the current tax bill. Seeks property specific information on documents from the party from a real-time information that only the person who owns the property would know. Send a letter to the record owner saying, hey, I've been notified that you're selling your property. Stress the importance of an immediate reply. If the person who owns the property isn't selling the property, believe me, you're going to get a response. Other ways to verify information: ask for original tax bills or original utility bills. That information, those bills are easily obtained in online version, but the original bills only the owner would have. Get copies of off-record closing documents, original settlement statements, original title insurance policies. The title insurance policy you can get online from the title insurance company, but the original only the owner would have. Only the owner is going to have the original signed settlement statement from their closing. Any local contacts that can confirm the identity of the owner, the neighbors, the attorney might be familiar with the attorney, the actual attorney for the seller may know. Compare answers and information provided with information obtained from research. I mean, I've talked to attorneys who've done unbelievable due diligence on these people. LinkedIn, I've had people do what they've called stalking on these people. So you really want to do your due diligence to verify that these people are who they are. When Joe gets into his examples of the claims that we've had on these scams, it's pretty scary what people don't do, and what a little due diligence could have done to verify that these people were in fact the owners of the property. Additional resources to confirm whether or not the transaction is legitimate. ID verification services, ID Verse by OCR Labs, and a link will be shared with you. This is a service that there are different verification services available. This is one of the services that CADIC has partnered with. It's a service by which you basically upload the ID, and then the person takes a selfie, and this service verifies within minutes whether or not that ID matches with the person, and it's about 99% accurate. So there are these ID verification services available. You can verify with other attorneys or parties that may have direct contact with the seller. And like I said, trust your instincts, go with your gut. I can't stress enough, if it doesn't pass the smell test, go with your gut. And if you have any other questions, discuss it with your attorney. Contact your closing attorney, who will contact one of us here in the underwriting department to have that discussion, to discuss exactly what you've done for your due diligence, to see whether or not it's matching up, and whether or not it's something that you want to go forward with. You'd rather be safe than sorry. It's never wrong to be too careful. In Massachusetts, we have the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has set up a consumer notification service. This is a link here that is going to be shared with you as well. These are the registries that have gone online with this service. This service is free for all residential properties. It is not available for commercial, but it is available for all residential properties. Consumers can go online to their local registry of deeds, and like I said, this was updated as of yesterday. And what you want to do is you want to go on to the registry of deeds to verify whether or not your local registry of deeds is participating. And when I say you want to check your registry of deeds, as of yesterday, this was the updated list. And I've added a couple of registries that are not even on this that are not even on the updated list. So you want to check it daily to see whether or not your local registry of deeds is participating, because registry of deeds are onboarding all the time, and the Commonwealth is clearly not updating their website. What you do is you add your name, and you can add up to 3 properties. And if anytime anything is recorded against your name or your property, the registry of deeds will notify you. And if you have recorded something, you don't need to do anything. But if you have not recorded anything, then you can notify the registry of deeds right away. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joe.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Melanie and Nicole. As Melanie said, my name's Joe Taborsak. I'm Senior Claims Counsel at CADIC. I investigate and resolve title insurance claims on a daily basis. You can imagine that we see just about everything. And we're going to share some sort of claims war stories with you to give you a few different looks on what these vacant or unoccupied property frauds might look like. And I'll just preface it by saying there isn't a one size fits all sort of fact pattern to what these frauds look like. However, we are seeing a trend of increasing what we call seller impersonation fraud, where, you know, an imposter seller fools realtors, attorneys, others in the transaction that they are the owners of the property. One of the key takeaways that you've heard Melanie say, and you'll probably hear me say over and over again, is that these frauds only happen if we let them happen, really. I mean, at the end of the day, if we don't ask questions, if we don't do our due diligence. So keep that in mind as we give you a few different looks on these. And the common denominator, of course, is whether it's an REO property, whether it's just vacant raw land. No one is living in the property and regularly monitoring it. So these properties are especially vulnerable to frauds. So the first claim we're going to talk about, this was an REO property that had a structure on it. Your typical REO property with an overgrown lawn. Anyone driving down the street would be able to tell this property is unoccupied and vacant. So it's an easy target for a bad actor, easy to find. This bad actor took advantage of the land records by recording a fraudulent deed purporting to transfer title into his name. And by doing this, he created the fraudulent basis for him to later obtain a refinance and get funds against this property that he actually did not own. He would go to great lengths, this bad actor. He actually broke into the property and started fixing it up to appear like a real owner. And for all we know, had he gotten away with it longer, he may have committed another fraud and flipped the property to someone else. So fast forward, after a few months of holding bogus title to the property and acting like the owner, the bad actor gets a mortgage for $100,000. The attorneys involved in the refinance did not suspect a fraud. They did not vet the seller's story on how he came into title, even though the deed into him suggested that he purchased the property for a song at $32,000. But no one asked any questions. The refinance takes place a few months after the transaction. The true owner discovers activity going on at their property. Shortly thereafter, the mortgage is discovered on the land records, the lender is contacted, and after a significant amount of work, we in the claims department were able to provide enough evidence to the police department to have an arrest warrant issued for a suspect who was later arrested and prosecuted. But the claim resulted in a complete failure of title and a significant loss was paid. So what went wrong here? We have a common denominator. This is a vacant property. It was vulnerable to a fraud. No one's monitoring it. No one's watching it. These properties, as soon as we learn that they're vacant or unoccupied, they have to be on our radar. Here, there was a recent title transfer into the bad actor, and this story highlights why we have to be scrutinizing the 24-month chain of title when dealing with a property like this. If a deed fraud has been perpetrated, putting title in an imposter like this, it's more likely that the bad actor has recently recorded the fraudulent deed. If you think about it, they're obviously trying to turn the property over quickly, most likely for cash, looking for a cash buyer. In this case, it was a refinance, and avoid being caught. They're not likely to be holding the property for years. But there's another important common theme here that we have to highlight, a complete lack of vetting the seller's story, asking basic questions of the seller about how they came into ownership and vetting those answers. No one ever asked. So let's look at some visuals here. Let's give you a real life forged document. They can vary in quality as bad actors have different levels of sophistication. But here we see that there is a deed and there's both a grantor, Jennifer Johnson, an officer with US Bank, and a Jane Burkett listed as the notary public. Why am I bringing this up? Well, these are real people. And why do we know this? Because we had to contact them in our investigation. So the point here is that if anyone, a realtor, an attorney in the transaction had asked questions, which they didn't, and had doubts about the bad actor story, you could contact these people. You could take a look at the deed and call these people to find out if they were involved in the transaction and whether it was a legitimate transaction. In our investigation, we were able to quickly search through Google and LinkedIn, locate these people, They turned out to be real people, and we got verification from US Bank that these two people did not sign this document and the transaction was a fraud. From there, we were able to get affidavits from both of them and provide those affidavits to the police department, which formed the basis of the arrest warrant. So this is just a tool that we all have if we're skeptical of a deed, of someone's ownership. We can reach out and locate people on the deed, witnesses, notaries, attorneys, in order to vet the seller's story. But it all starts with asking questions, and that obviously didn't happen here. So this next claim, different type of property, different situation. This involves a vacant waterfront home in poor but stable condition with million-dollar views of Long Island Sound. The property was not listed on MLS or otherwise advertised for sale. What occurred here was there was this neighbor who had been interested in buying the property for years and had been hoping for an opportunity to buy it for a bargain. So this neighbor learned that title had recently transferred after checking the town tax records, which we know are public information, which showed the home had an approximate fair market value of $1.3 million. So off the tax bill, the neighbor obtains the address of the alleged new owner and writes her to see if she's interested in selling the property. And so negotiations take place with no real estate agents involved, and a cash price of approximately 39% of the fair market value is agreed to. In this transaction and in this story, there were so many red flags. And it's worth noting, like any cash deal, there were no lenders involved. In this case, no real estate agents involved. So you have less people in the transaction, less eyes reviewing, less vetting, less people asking questions. This is an ideal situation for a bad actor trying to pull off a fraud. Cash deals are a recurring theme in frauds involving vacant properties. So more about the red flags. The seller bore no relation to the foreign couple who last owned the property, according to the chain of title. And the quitclaim deed was for nominal consideration for this waterfront property with no conveyance tax paid, as stamped right on the face of the document. It was also noted right on the deed that the deed was prepared by the bad actor, the seller, suggesting that there were no attorneys involved in the alleged transfer of title into her name. That should be a red flag to anyone. But remarkably, no one in the transaction in any meaningful way questioned this person about how she acquired this waterfront property for no consideration. And it's hard to believe, but it gets worse. In this case, the seller, claiming to be abroad, okay, common theme, required that the closing take place by mail, another common theme, and that funds be wired to her foreign account. Again, another common theme. Bad actors do not meet face to face, rarely ever, with anyone, and will require that the closing take place by mail and that funds be wired. Obviously, if they had to attend a closing or actually meet with somebody, their true identity could be learned, and if someone suspected a fraud, they could be physically arrested. So they keep themselves at a distance. They communicate mostly by email and sometimes text, and will not typically meet anyone face to face. But again, these frauds only happen if we let them happen. So the failures and oversights reached a pinnacle when, leading up to the closing, the purported seller could not produce a key for the final walkthrough. So rather than seeing this as a glaring red flag, the buyer's attorney requested and coordinated bringing a locksmith to the property to remove the lock and provide the buyer with access to the property. This was a catastrophic failure. Again, in terms of common themes, failure to vet the seller's story, and here really a failure to ask questions of the seller on any meaningful level. Fast forward, transaction closes. The real owner's handyman discovers someone is occupying the property. He notifies the true owners, they lawyer up, lawsuits are filed, everyone's being sued. We have a complete failure of title with, again, another significant loss. So what went wrong here? The common denominator, again, is vacant or unoccupied property. Here, we have an insider taking advantage because her mother knew the foreign couple and knew the property was, and she knew the property was vacant, allowing her to orchestrate this fraud. But again, none of this happens without people in the transaction turning a blind eye to several red flags. So let's look at the visuals here. Right on the face of the quitclaim deed into the bad actor, we see two different addresses for the bad actor. Okay, that's a little bit strange. We also see that this waterfront property was conveyed for $10 and other valuable consideration. That the document itself was prepared by the bad actor with no apparent attorney involved in this transaction. We see that there was no conveyance tax paid as per the stamp right on the document. There it is, no conveyance tax received. And then lastly, the name of the prior owner appears differently in the acknowledgement than in other parts of the deed. And no one questioned her whatsoever. We have to think about recent title transfers into a one-off seller like this. We have to scrutinize these recent title transfers as possible frauds. Again, though, the most glaring failure here is on the part of those involved in the transaction, not questioning or vetting how this person allegedly came into title in the face of so many warning signs. So let's go to the fraud du jour in 2023 we are seeing involving vacant land or unoccupied property. This is, as we discussed a little bit, seller impersonation fraud. In this type of fraud, again, the common denominator here is vacant property or raw land. No one is regularly monitoring it or living there. Recently, we have noticed that certain areas in the country that are desirable vacation spots have been a popular target of these frauds. And if you think about it, given the desirability, there are going to be more people willing to jump on an opportunity to purchase a too good to be true lot or property. It's sort of a baked in desperate buyer into this sort of type of opportunity, looking to buy one of these highly desirable properties. Bad actors know this and they are taking advantage of it. Here, there was a listing agent involved, okay, who listed the property on MLS as 17 acres of vacant land being offered at $400,000. It's a lot of land. Describing the property as a great opportunity to own 17 acres of raw land, minutes to some of the best beaches in the area. Who wouldn't want that, right? Of course, a buyer sees this vacant lot listed in a very desirable town and jumps on it. Desperate to avoid a bidding war, offers full cash price and will close in 90 days. Again, highly desirable, limited supply, we know, equals guaranteed desperate buyers willing to jump on a too good to be true deal. So how does this begin? The agent gets the lead from a major real estate listing service. Takeaway number one, this is a one-off client. The real estate agent had no prior relationship with this person, no prior dealings, okay? We have to see that as a person we need to ask questions of, a person we need to vet. We have no prior dealings with this person. The real estate agent communicates with the so-called seller by an app, mostly by an app, and by emails, playing into the hand of the bad actor, allowing them to stay distanced from as many people as possible in the transaction. So takeaway number two, an elusive seller, keeping their distance, no face-to-face whatsoever. The real estate agent gets this story through communicating with the bad actor, they tell her that they inherited the property and wanted to sell it because they live in South Africa. So ask yourself, how many times have you heard that, right? Um, this is an ownership story that should cause anyone to stop, ask questions, vet, and require proof. And this is where things really go over the cliff here. The listing agent just basically buys this story, no questions asked, and does not ask for any proof of identification from the bad actor, no government IDs, no other proof of ownership. She simply takes them on their word that they're the owners. In fact, during the investigation, it was learned that she Googled the so-called seller's home address in South Africa and thought it looked like a nice neighborhood. That was the sort of due diligence that she did. And obviously that is not due diligence. And we would all do much, much more than that. This was a major failure. When we don't do our own vetting, our own due diligence, this is the type of vetting we can be relying on, okay? I think this agent fell into the trap of presuming legitimacy. This is another important takeaway that Melanie touched on. We can't presume legitimacy when dealing with a one-off client, a seller, someone we have never done business with and do not otherwise know. Maybe she thought she got them as a lead from a major listing service that someone verified that they're the true owners. I don't know, but we can't do that. So it sort of snowballs from there. The agent refers the bad actor to an attorney that she has a business relationship with. You can see the pattern here. The attorney, happy to take the referral, also does not require any government ID from the purported sellers. He falls into the trap. He's dealing with a trusted source, someone he knows, the listing agent. And so therefore, he must think, well, these people are probably legitimate. They're coming from a trusted source. He fails to obtain ID. He fails to ask questions. He fails to vet. Fast forward, transaction moves forward, cash deal with no bank involved, no bank asking questions, no bank looking at it. Ideal for a bad actor. Transaction closes a few months later. The buyer hears of a fraud involving a neighboring property where the sellers claimed to be from South Africa. Obviously, this was very disturbing for him to hear, and he starts to ask questions. And sure enough, the fraud is unraveled. He learns that he's not the true owner of the property and that this has all been a fraud. And it's a complete failure of title situation again and a significant loss. So what went wrong? Here, we have to highlight, don't fall into the trusted source or trusted contact trap. We can't presume legitimacy of a person, of a seller, because we're simply dealing with an attorney or a real estate agent that we know. We can't assume that their client is legitimate. The same goes for if you obtain a lead from a listing service. We cannot presume legitimacy of the people simply because of that fact, especially one-off sellers, people you've had no prior history with. We can't rely on the due diligence of others simply because we know who is representing them. This is a problem in real estate, and these bad actors are exploiting us for it. They're aware of it, and they're exploiting us for it. It's a common theme in these transactions. So let's talk about this actual acknowledgement. Okay, here you can see a man named Frank Whitaker, notary public, allegedly notarized this document. We were able to Google and find him in about 15 seconds. He's a real person. These fraudsters actually use real people. I think the theory is maybe if someone does a little bit of digging, They'll find, oh, that's a real person. They could notarize this document, therefore the deed must be legitimate. But the flip side of that is that if you actually challenge that, reach out to the person, as what happened here in the investigation, unfortunately, law enforcement quickly learned that Frank Whitaker did not notarize these documents and the transaction was a fraud. So obviously an opportunity was lost there. Had someone thought their ownership was questionable, they could have done just what law enforcement did and found out, wait a minute, this is a fraud. We have to stop here. So let's talk about common themes, okay? Vacant or unoccupied properties have to be on our radar immediately. They're uniquely vulnerable to fraud. We cannot presume the legitimacy of one-off sellers who we've never dealt with or done business with before. And it's our responsibility as professionals to slow things down, to ask questions, to get answers, and to require proof. Sort of common overall takeaway here is, we can't do business like it's the good old days anymore, where we know the attorney or the real estate agent on the other side, so we figure, their client has to be a good person or is legitimate. We can't fall into those traps. Bad actors are aware of that, and they're exploiting us for it. And in the end, these frauds really only happen if we let them happen and fail to do our own due diligence. That basically wraps up my remarks. I'm going to turn it over to Melanie for some closing comments, and I think we're going to take some questions.
Thanks, Joe. And thank you, Coast to Coast and Lear, for having us. Really, my key takeaway from all of this is really to, like I've said, I can't say it enough, is to trust your instincts and to go with your gut and not fall into a false sense of security. I think that's the best thing that I can say to you, is to not fall into that false insecurity. I think that's where the bad actors, that's what they're relying on, is us letting our guard down, and as Joe said, relying on other people to have done their due diligence, and having and just trusting the legitimacy of the other people's work. So just always being hyper vigilant. Unfortunately, that's the world we live in. And whether it doesn't feel good to be questioning the seller or the seller's attorney, but I think people appreciate the fact that you're being overcautious, and everybody's going to be in the same position at some point. So with that, we're going to take some questions. And if we don't get to all the questions, I know we're over time, so if we don't get to your question, we will address them. And if you have any questions, contact Nicole, and we'll, if you ever have any questions, contact Nicole, and we will, we will help you get through this. These are trying times, or difficult times. All right.
Do you guys want me to read you some of the questions?
Sure.
Or can you say them? So Andrea, actually, it's not a question. She just said that this class should be offered monthly, and I believe Sergio is recording this, so it actually can be viewed again and again, but we will definitely offer this and some other webinars again with Caddick. Alicia, unfortunately, it's happened to me 3 times in the last month, 2 vacant lands and 1 condo. Oh my gosh, Alicia. Hopefully it all worked out. Lynn Durham has inheritance. You need to see death certificates of owners of records and proof of inheritance. Will still could be created, I guess. It sounds like she's saying that they could still, maybe they could still create some fake wills or probate documents. I'm not sure, Lynn. We might want to reach out to Lynn and just ask specifically what that question was. Len, in the land that actually sold, then the buyer is out of his money and land still belongs to the seller. But is the real estate agent on the hook? Is the real estate agent sued by buyer, by the title company, by the seller? You got that one?
There's a lot going on there.
I would honestly think the answer would be it depends.
Yeah.
A horrible lawyer answer for everything, but Len, I would definitely think it would be on a case-to-case situation on how it happened, blah, blah, blah. So
Yeah, I would just say that's absolutely correct. I think as a listing agent, you know, you really have to be careful and do your own due diligence, because you're essentially presenting a person out to the world as the owner of that property. And so you have to be obviously doing your own due diligence there. And, you know, of course, you know, we used some war stories that provide glaring examples of what not to do. And I know the people on this call will be much more professional than you know, these examples. But that's why, you know, we bring these examples up, because these are great questions, and it's a topic that we all need to be more aware of, so that we can see the warning signs coming and press people for answers. Really, one of the most glaring failures here is that just the absolute failure to ask any questions. You can imagine if basic questions were asked of a lot of these bad actors, they would be pressed to provide answers, and then, you know, maybe become defensive. And that's a theme that I think we can't talk about too much. And so it's a good question, and um, I appreciate that, and the comments that are made are all very good, showing that the people here, you know, are aware of this issue, are thinking about it, are talking about it, are spotting it. That's great to hear. So
Joe, so there is a question here about what happens to the original owners, to
good
the
question.
true
Yeah.
owners, the
Yeah.
true owners after
Well,
the
I'll
fact.
tell you, I'm gonna speak kind of generically, which is something I try not to do too much, because like Nicole was saying, everything is, you know, case by case basis. The circumstances vary so drastically from one case to another. But generally speaking, a seller who's been defrauded, or I shouldn't say a seller, a true property owner who is the victim of an imposter selling their property, they're most likely going to wind up entangled in some sort of a legal mess, because they're probably going to have to sue the person who's basically standing in the buyer's shoes. But they're most likely going to win that litigation if it gets to that point. In some cases, it's so apparent that there's a fraud that's occurred that these types of matters resolve quickly. But a lot of them go into litigation. I'll be honest. The true owner, if they have what we call clean hands and weren't involved in the fraud somehow, you know, they're generally going to win. You know, so they're going to win that litigation if they have to get into it. Depending on their title insurance policy, they may very well be protected for a fraud that has occurred, like this, an imposter trying to sell their property out from under them. So they would be smart to locate their title insurance policy and see if they have coverage for one of these sort of post-policy frauds. That as well is a possibility.
So there's a follow-up question on that, which is a very good question, which Joe just addressed as well. and it says, and the mortgage that they didn't sign, which I'm going to let Joe address that as well, if you don't mind, Joe. But I'm thinking about the post policy coverage on this. So it says, and the mortgage that they didn't sign.
I'm not quite sure I understand what is meant by the mortgage they didn't sign. These are generally cash deals. Again, trying to keep a lender out of the transaction, less eyes, helps the bad actor pull off the fraud. So I'm not quite.
I think she's thinking about the situation where the person ended up getting financing in your first example.
Okay.
The guy got financing on his deal, and so this is yes, she said yes.
So in a situation like that, it's a good question. This gets into sort of title insurance coverage and the different types of policies. As many people know, if you refinance your home, you're going to be buying a mortgagee or lender title insurance policy to insure the mortgage. In that situation, that happened. So a mortgagee or lender policy was issued in connection with that transaction. So when the bank found out that it had a mortgage that was on a property of an imposter, they filed a title insurance claim under their policy, and it turned out to be a covered claim. So in that situation, that's a good that's a good example to understand how lenders are protected through title insurance from these types of frauds in most cases.
Can I interject for a second, Joe? Wouldn't it also, if you had an expanded owner's policy, be covered under post policy forgery if you had an expanded owner's policy?
In this situation, it didn't get to that point, but yeah, that would be possible if it were an owner's claim. But in this situation, it was a lender's claim.
But I think she's asking about the fact that now you've got a mortgage on your property. Now this person has this mortgage on their property that they didn't put on their property.
Right. And the mortgage was a result of a fraud. So they're not going to be able to foreclose that mortgage, and the owner would be protected. But again, sort of one of the saving graces is that whenever a refinance takes place and a mortgage is put on a property, a mortgagee policy is required by the bank in order to close. So that took care of the problem there because the bank's protected, so they're going to get paid. And then the mortgage is going to go away. So hopefully that sort of explains the nuance there. And so that owner really, I mean, didn't really suffer anything. I think the property got fixed up a little bit in the process, but it was a failure. It was a fraud. There's something to be learned from it, of course, here. So good question.
I don't see any more questions in the chat. Hold on one minute. So what are the important questions to ask about title insurance policies, or do all cover post-closing problems?
That's
the good old depends.
Yeah, so that is a very specific question, and not all title insurance policies cover. They don't. I'm going to let Joe answer it. That is a pretty specific question, and it's pretty detailed. The general answer to that is not all of them cover all post policy problems, and not all. There's only certain coverages that cover post policy problems.
Yes, and we would be here for hours if we were to go through all the nuances. I agree with that answer. What sort of post-policy event is covered versus what is not. It depends on the terms of the specific policy. And there are a number of different policies out there in the market.
I think we have one final one and then probably can wrap up. An agent had stated he has one going right now. Can I send you the passports that I got from the owner?
Nicole, well, Nicole, why don't we, is that, let's see. Do you just have the passports?
So I think, so that's Dan. So Dan, if you're still on, why don't you, yes, passports only.
Okay, so why don't you work, is this someone, how about
Dan, you can,
yeah,
oh. Thanks,
Okay.
Dan. Okay, so we'll help you out on that one.
yeah, we'll help, we can work on that. Okay,
Perfect.
so if anybody has any more questions, we're gonna sign off now, but if you have any more questions, if you can reach out to Nicole directly, and my contact information is on the PowerPoint, which is available, will be available on the website. And there's a link to the mass underwriting sheet, and my contact information is on there. We'd like to thank you for having us today. This has been a lot of fun. So I hope that it's been informative and helpful. But if you have any questions, you can reach out to me anytime.
Thank you, Melanie.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Joe.
Thank you,
Thank you
everybody.
very much. Have a great day.